So we're excited to come here and share with you what we did to handle this minor news event that occurred last Tuesday and really into Wednesday morning from our side. And from our standpoint, it revolved around what we did in the planning aspect of that, really how we created the visibility to be confident to deliver our platform with that type of load. And you heard the term visibility mentioned several times in the keynote today. You're going to hear us mention it a lot. It's crucial to us as we feel going forward with our delivery of our digital platform to have the visibility that we need. Otherwise, you're playing sort of a whack-a-mole type situation as problems occur. So let's see, let's get this loaded up. Okay, so we grabbed this image of this mountain peak here, and if I was a better Photoshop artist, I'd be able to overlay our traffic graph from Tuesday evening and Wednesday morning, and it would pretty much look like that peak there. Really dramatic surge, as the polls started to close, and ourselves and our other news, our other peers in the news industry all saw those dramatic lifts, and it's what we set ourselves up to be able to handle that type of surge. Was really important to us. So before we jump into it, I want to give some visibility to who's here from our team at Gannett and USA Today. Myself, I'm Eric Burst. I'm responsible for the Platform as a Service organization. And this organization was really tasked, a couple of years ago to deliver the next generation of our infrastructure platform for Gannett and USA Today. We had traditionally been a data center heavy, owned and operated data center heavy environment with a lot of manual actions involved in it. And we really wanted to move to a cloud platform using the public cloud, disposable infrastructure, heavy automation actions occurring throughout the stack. So it was really a change from multiple layers, process changes, tool set changes, and probably the toughest, which is the culture changes that is out there. And from the tool set changes, one of the key pieces that we brought in was New Relic. Our New Relic relationship started earlier this year, and generally has been a very positive relationship with them. We've challenged them in several areas, and for the most part, they've delivered to us. So a lot of almost every feature or every tool that New Relic gives us, we have ingrained inside of our ecosystem. Also along with me, I've got Franklin Hansen, who is up here speaking with me today, and he's the senior manager on our PaaS delivery team, which surfaces that cloud platform. And then I've also got Al Kemner with me, who is speaking tomorrow at about 10:45 inside the New Relic infrastructure session. So I'd really encourage you guys to, if you're interested, just pull us aside, talk to us. As much as we love coming and presenting and talking and attending different sessions here, some of the best conversations we have, or the most important stuff that we get out of it, is those side conversations that we have with folks that are battling the same problems as us from a technology standpoint or otherwise. Okay, so let's talk about Gannett. You've heard me mention a couple times I'm from Gannett in USA Today. The Gannett name doesn't always put a light bulb off in everybody's head. It's when you mention, oh, well, Gannett owns USA Today, right? And so Gannett owns USA Today, which everybody is really familiar with, and we also own over 100 local markets inside of the U.S., and some of those are quite large, like Indianapolis Star, Detroit Free Press, Arizona Republic. Some of those are very small. Baxter Bulletin in Mountain Home, Arkansas, is one of our smaller properties. But together, what this establishes is our national and local reach, and we think that's a really competitive advantage as we look against our peers. This is just a visual here of showing the different markets that we cover inside the U.S. And especially as you related to elections and how we had certain battleground states that were certainly key in the election. Our coverage in those markets really played a key role in how we presented it to our national and local audiences coming onto the platform. And I will say, I want to add one thing here is you see that we've sort of rebranded our products as the USA Today Network, right? And it's truly a network that we've really been able to establish from a content organization and also a platform organization to share that national and local content. Okay, so let's start talking about what occurred last week. This is a traffic graph from 2016, broken up by day. You'll see a natural ebb and flow of our news traffic. Our traffic is fairly predictable in a normal sense, of when folks consume news on our platforms. But then you also see there's some outliers in that, with one maybe a really big outlier towards the right side of that graph. And so for us, it's very rare for us to have a chance to plan for a dramatic traffic event on our site. And this, I've sort of pulled the top 8 or 9 here, and really the items that are highlighted in red are unplanned events. Those are breaking news situations where we will go, multiples of X in a very, very short time frame because of breaking news that are hit. Our platform was built to scale appropriately, so we're able to handle those lifts. But as you take a look at the planned events, we know the fingerprint to a certain degree of how that planned event will act and interact with our back-end systems from a performance standpoint, and that's clearly highlighted with the right-hand side there with the elections platform. So let's just dive quickly into some of the products that our editorial team focused on. This is the USA Today desktop website. Had a very rich coverage of the elections platform. Maps and data and stories flowing through that heavily. This is Indianapolis Star mobile product. Again, focuses heavy on rich data there inside of that experience. I mentioned Baxter Bulletin earlier. This is Baxter Bulletin's tablet site. So again, even at a local site, we're able to bring that rich data in. And as you look at the fingerprint of what the elections meant to us, it was really a situation where we had to focus on the editorial timeliness of the content that was going on. That's not only just articles and headlines going out, that's data that's coming in from the election side of things, that's the color coding of maps whenever all the users are refreshing. And we had to try to gain the competitive advantage inside the editorial timeliness. So that meant we had to tighten up our TTLs, our caching, right? So we lowered our caching to probably the lowest level we had it this year for a lot of our platforms. And that was really meant to make sure that we were competitive inside of the speed race that is the elections. But as you lower that, that's also putting additional stress on your architecture and your back-end systems. So it's something we really had to account for, and to make sure we were accounted for, we had to have the visibility that we were going to be able to know what was occurring. I'm just going to quickly touch on this. This shows that our marketing team is great at USA Today and Gannett. They were able to really make a large push to get our reach about what we were doing around elections coverage in front of a lot of folks. 225 million unique users read stories in advance of this elections about what we were going to do across all of our properties in our network. That obviously generated new traffic coming into our sites. And then on-air content mentions. It's something we track very closely. On all the major news stations, we had over 210 million impressions from on-air content mentions about the USA Today network to drive traffic back. Okay, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Franklin here to take us through.
Thanks, Eric. I think one of the really important things about our industry has been the transformation out of print into digital media. And it's hard to explain to people how important it is for us to embrace digital world, to really understand our customers, and to deliver an experience that continues to grow our digital brands. And that comes to us as a very finite cost when we look at what is the speed of our pages, what's the experience like for our customers, be it on mobile or on desktop browsing or our native iOS or Android applications. There are some kind of arbitrary quotes we could pull from the industry that says 40% of readers leave a page if it takes more than 3 seconds to load. And previously that was something that business would come to us, the content newsroom would come and say, hey, you're too slow and we know we're losing readership because of you, and that affects our market share. That affects not only ad revenue on the pages, but our ability to sell ad revenue for further campaigns. So we really need to make sure that we're optimizing both the applications themselves and any underlying infrastructure we're using to run that. But not only that, but we also want to take a look at that and say, well, if I know the page duration, can I actually relate that to how page views look? So if we look at those durations, if there's a long duration on page view, I can see that reflected in the dips in my page views. And that's monetized income that matters to us when we make that digital transition. So the way we get around that for us is we load test before these big events or before we have releases, or when we're as much as we can to plan for the architecture that we've rolled out. And it's a pretty complicated system. Coming out of the data center world, we had largely monolithic stacks. There was a lot of .NET stacks that were running on old Windows boxes that were built very heavily on top of VMware, and we wanted to move away from that world in this transformation. We went to a microservice stack running on public cloud with immutable infrastructure that we destroy whenever we roll a release. And that really makes load testing hard when you think about what are the pieces that are affected by the load test, be it on a web application or the data tier or any middle tier APIs that may have third-party dependencies. We tend to see that the pain from that manifests itself in very different ways than it used to. Whereas previously in this monolithic stack, if we hammered that application, yeah, we'd see maybe database load go up, or we'd see the stack as a whole CPU increase. But in the new world, if we look at something like our service maps in New Relic, we can really see that this dependency is no longer a single machine or a single stack. Just looking at our universal web application, which we use to serve our election subdomain, you can see we've got 6 critical subdependencies here that are in groups that we've used. If you look at our iOS and our Android app, they've got a plethora of underlying dependencies. And these aren't even the third parties that we call out to. These are just the ones that sit inside of our stack. But it's really important for us, as we load test, to understand that if we're making calls to iOS to load test its endpoints, we may be affecting universal web if there's a common platform underneath, and teams are going to see that pain. So the way we've kind of built around that is trying to implement monitoring in a holistic sense throughout large portions of our applications and our stack. I've got some examples up here showing APM data for our elections subpage. We've got browser module looking at web transaction times for our underlying elections results API. And I think one of the big things that we really depended on going into elections night was our insights dashboard, which is kind of a collection of all the different pieces that we were using to monitor each of these things. Whether it came out of APM or it came out of browser or it came out of synthetics, it didn't matter because we were trying to collect all of that experience together to put in front of all the teams that were sitting in our war room. As we moved into this, going to elections, we had moved on to immutable infrastructure that we destroyed every release. And we were doing that in the public cloud, and our release times were taking 30 minutes to destroy every box that held the release and chef new boxes and spin them up from scratch every time, which was really awesome for understanding how an application was going to behave during a release. But unfortunately, it was really slow. We get a lot of times as you get towards large events that you know about, you tend to hear moratorium thrown around when you get into that. And for us, the moratorium was imposed by the newsroom to say, we care more about the stability of the application and the platform than we do about whatever changes or code or bug releases you guys want to do going into this. And as an engineer, that's really painful for me. It hurts me to know that there is a bug on the platform on Monday that Tuesday customers are going to see. It hurts me to know that we're going to spend more on infrastructure when we spin this stuff that we don't need to be spending because there's a fix that could be handling the Linux kernel bug and load averages that we had to take care of 2 weeks ago. We solved that as a team based on the knowledge we had from these dashboards. For us, that meant deploying Kubernetes about 2 weeks before the election. It was our first run at Docker in production, and we launched the universal web subdomain for the elections on that platform. And we built insights dashboards with tagging and dynamic infrastructure and all that wrapped into that so that all the teams involved could see all the pieces that went into that. And that worked really well for us. That worked really, really well to the point where we were sitting in the war room and we realized that one of those bugs was affecting customer impact, and we said, forget the moratorium, we're going to roll a release. And we rolled that release. We cut the application over from our traditional infrastructure into the Kubernetes cluster on election night while results were coming in that depended on that application. And the dashboards we had built dynamically updated to show us the change in load. So when we originally started this, right, the containers that were running inside of our cluster updated on the board. We could track our response times. The East and West clusters were our 2 Kubernetes clusters running in US East 1 and US West 2. The load average spikes you're seeing on there are from our actual releases and not actually from load during that thing. That's how rock solid it was. It's hard to understate what a difference that makes. And going into that night and the day of, during moratorium, we had 176 successful releases on this platform because of the visibility we had, because we were comfortable with the infrastructure we had in place, and we knew, rather than guessing or hoping, we knew where we were going to be before and after release. That really speaks to the feedback loop that we want to have. I think I can't understate how important it is for us, at least, to be able to take an application, not through just a traditional development lifecycle, but really one in the heat of the moment to understand what it takes to go from release 1 to release 2. And for us, that was to develop an application, to tune the application either from your load testing results or from live traffic, to monitor it once you've got that release out there, and take those results, figure it out, and put a new release back in to continue the process. The way we got that information was we used custom instrumentation and APM for part of it, at least. The infrastructure and a lot of that was built through the New Relic infrastructure and things like that. But for our actual code base to understand what was going on between these releases, for our Node.js API services and for the Universal Web Election Services running on Golang, we had a custom instrumentation to wrap our controllers and our routes to be able to pass that information back to us. So really what that meant for us was being proactive about performance issues. We didn't need to wait for it to hit a customer if we had this information instrumented that we could see when we run a PR. We'll actually be able to tell the results because we'll get information pumped back into New Relic from our PRs. That's a huge thing for us to get it before it's merged to master. And that really increases our velocity. I took this within the last week. We did 290 deployments, and for us, that's a lot of deployments on a few applications. And this is only encompassing the ones that have been wrapped with our brand new deployment API internally. That's a small sliver of what's to come for us as we continue to roll this out. The big thing for that was all of the operations people were much happier after this, which I say operations, but really the way we handle it is at application teams, and that includes developers, and that includes product folks, and that includes security, and includes traditional operations. And they get called less, which is really awesome. And as an engineer who was on call and who doesn't like to be on call, I like not getting called as often, as long as I know it's still calling people when I need it. And we track that. These are actually our VictorOps charts coming out of this to show mean time to resolution and acknowledgement for alerts, as well as the number of alerts that were coming in leading up to elections. And it's pretty awesome to see that I've got actual evidence that things are going better for us now that we can see what's going on. That's pretty powerful for us. It gets so powerful, I think, that it got visibility inside our organization, which is a fairly large organization, for our CTO to give a quote for this. And I don't want to read the whole quote, but I'm particularly fond of. It says, better tooling and application monitoring has allowed us to achieve our goals and deliver a robust and engaging experience to our users. And that's really cool as an engineer to see somebody at the C-level saying the work that you're doing to implement visibility and monitoring and to be better developers and engineers and operations folks is positively influencing the business. And that's recognized, and that's pretty fantastic. So at the end of all that, we've solved all these problems. I'll pass it back to Eric to talk about, was it actually a successful elections coverage?
I guess we should have actually had a question mark on that success rather than an exclamation point. But so let's start with this is our one of our war rooms that we had from a platform as a service standpoint. What you'll see there is our insights dashboard that we have up, a lot of infrastructure data that's on there. What you don't see in this picture is beads of sweat coming down all of our foreheads because we're nervous about what's about to go on or what have you. We really felt confident that we had set ourselves up with the right visibility going into this event. That, and not saying that unexpected things didn't happen, but when they did happen that night, we had the visibility to know and what to take action with. So I just took a couple snapshots of some New Relic synthetics numbers here. So 100% availability for our end users here. And zero failures inside of that election time frame, which was Tuesday into Wednesday. It's worth noting that this is end user impact, right? So our end users did not see any issues. We had some things we had to work through on the back end side with our architecture and our ecosystem, but we were able to do it. We got early warnings inside that. We had the visibility to make the changes so our end users weren't impacted. This is, again, sort of that mountain peak that I showed you guys in that first slide. This is our page views. This is coming from New Relic browser here to be able to show you the severe impact that we had from surges of traffic through that time frame. And so this is our business customer internally. I want you to think about your toughest customer that you have, or your toughest internal group that you have, and that's our editorial team. So this is the center, the hub of our USA Today newsroom here. And again, I'll sort of point attention to what they're actually doing, which is working. There's not a line. So our war room is right in the back of that picture there. There's not a line at that door, right? If there was problems, it would be like Best Buy on Black Friday morning. You know, there'd be a line streaming out that door of wanting to get at us and complain about something or other. But they didn't, right? They were pleased with what we delivered, you know, from an editorial timeliness standpoint, and it allowed them to do the job that they needed to do in such an important news event that was occurring. And wanted to pull this from our Chief Content Officer, Joanne Littman. You know, I'll focus on a part of here, but she says they had to be fast in referring to our timeliness aspect, preferably faster than the competition. They had to work across platforms and easily convey what was happening at any point in the night. And they had to work across the entire USA Today network. And the last thing she says is, looking back on election night, I feel that we met each of these goals. That's an awesome validation for us to hear from our toughest customer in one of the biggest, if not the biggest, event that we've had, you know, in the last several years from a digital standpoint. It was a historic night for us from a traffic standpoint, as it was for our peers. So I just put a little plug in here from our standpoint. You know, we have a growing team, and we're looking for top talent who wants to come and join what we're doing. We feel like we really challenge ourselves with how our architecture is built, the tool sets we're using, how we can get better and deliver across our network in a more optimized way. So these are email addresses of us here that are at the conference. Feel free to reach out to us. Feel free to pull us aside in this conference.
There you go. That's how we have it set up today. We are still tracking our core product development teams, Kubernetes clusters in East and West. As you can see by the chaotic load average, they are still rolling releases on a pretty regular pace. We've been tracking container restarts. We thought that was pretty valuable for us. Early on into the process, we were trying to figure out a memory issue that was causing restarts on the containers. We actually dragged our entire New Relic account team into it. They were super helpful in getting us rolling that night. I'm sure they were all exhausted by the time they were done with us, but we were able to figure out the issue we were having and get all of our deployments rolling pretty much day of, which was pretty fantastic. We've got page view load time spent on the page, just trying to get a sense from this. Are our users actually behaving the way we expect based on the information we had, and then tracking underlying dependencies like I mentioned before, the elections results API, just to give that team an understanding of what dependencies they had.
Is that helpful? Is that helpful to say? Yeah.
So at some point you talked about load testing your application or your set of applications, and could you elaborate a bit on that and what solutions you actually use besides New Relic as part of your tool stack?
Sure. We've got a pretty large tool stack, but the ones particular to our load testing, most of it was web load testing. So we were using Taurus and JMeter. We were pointing it at either the containers, the Kubernetes HA proxies, or things like that we had in front of it, based on use cases that we knew from previous elections as best as possible, and then also just trying how much traffic can it hold at the rate we're going. And that was doing that while we were allowing auto-scaling of the containers themselves inside of Kubernetes, doing that while we locked it, doing that while we allowed auto-scaling of the Kubernetes workers in the cluster and seeing how fast they spun up, and whether or not we could transition load fast enough on a scaling instance. That's really what we were targeting, and we would do that both at the web API level, the election service API, which was surfacing the map. If anybody was on USA Today on the election night, the map that was showing all the different colors and how states were, that was being load tested actually while you were all probably clicking on it on this Kubernetes cluster live that night before we transitioned over, which is pretty cool. And then our aggregator that was pulling results from AP was being load tested to make sure that our results were live and faster than anybody else's that night. So.
Yeah, I think we're also running up against time here. So appreciate you guys coming to our session, and please pull us aside you know, sometime during the next today or tomorrow. We'd love to chat more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.